Dear colleagues, friends, partners, and all aviators and aerospace community, welcome to the first Air Convention Digital Week. I'm happy to open this digital event during the 5 days of interesting presentations, discussions, and exchange of the knowledge and experience which we have now these last 3 months. I'm very happy that we have a world record of a crowded conference with more than 2,000 participants. And coronavirus, COVID-19, probably created new way of the consumption. We can share our ideas, not leaving our places. Of course, it's not so pleasant to be remotely together with you, but this is a good opportunity to share our ideas and experience during these days. My presentation is about investment, community and environment, and about how we will live next 10 years, evaluating airlines' financials and evaluating financial sustainability. Probably most of you already had a new term in the investment banking and financial community, EBITDA. Before, many companies were being evaluated and market capitalization being based on the EBITDA, earning before interest, depreciation, tax, and amortization. Now we have new term, EBITDA, earning before interest, depreciation, taxes, amortization, and Corona. Last 3 months, we heard various interesting and before never had terms. How, for example, one airline company in February announced dividends for 2019, and a couple of weeks after, we asked for the state aid and government support to survive. What other changes will be in the airline industry within next couple of years? How to avoid that per night we have 90% drop of the share prices and market capitalization of various airline companies around the globe. Important to mention that even now we still have a different accounting standards in various jurisdictions, and aviation authorities supervising airline companies and supervising their financial sustainability still have a different standards. For example, in one countries, it's not obliged to formate accruals for the future maintenance, for the future redelivery of the aircraft, for the passengers' claims and various other things. But this is a consolidated information, and this is consolidated factors, which makes airlines pretty weak and pretty unsustainable businesses in front of the investors, in front of the authorities, in front of the all public financial community. Nevertheless, airline companies still the biggest economic distributors to the various cities, countries, and continents. According to the IATA, COVID-19 impact to the airline companies still is unclear the final number, but the minimum losses which will bring this pandemic is at least 63 billion. We always had numbers 100, 200 billions. We got the message from the France that Air France will get 7 billion governmental subsidy. Lufthansa will get 9.6 billion, Air Baltic 250 million, Norwegian around 500 million. Even Boeing was applied to get 60 billion subsidies from the government to manage all the financial issues which was driven by the Corona-19. So let's assume that is 63 billion, the minimum losses which will airline companies get out of this 3 months period 2020. Analysts and audit companies are considering that all companies should disclose risks, disclose impact, and at the beginning, March, April, many airline companies were disclosing in very conservative way. They were saying it is unknown what impact from COVID-19 will be 2020. It is unknown what losses it will bring. It is unknown what the outcome will be end of the year and what losses it will bring to the investors, governments, and the investment community. But there are in place requirements from the audit companies that everybody should declare, but declare when things happen. Important to mention that we, as a global world, as a community in the world, we know all pandemics and statistic numbers. Interesting that 10 years ago we have swine flu pandemic, 2009, 2010, and the total amount of the mortals was around 575,000 people. 10 years after, we have COVID-19, and total mortality now is around 400, less than 10 years ago. But we have a statistic already in place. Every 10 years, we have a pandemic. Important to mention that swine flu 10 years ago brought around 4.3 billion losses to the airline businesses. 10 years after, as I mentioned, we have losses at least 63 billion. So if we have accruals for the maintenance, if we have accruals for the passengers' claims and compensations to them, if we have accruals to whatever, so airline business is one of first businesses which is impacted by a pandemic, and the statistic is already in place. We are talking not just about 10 years. If we had, there is a history about 100 years and all kind of the disease and pandemics around the world. But I'm just mentioning two: swine flu and COVID-19. So if the losses for 2009-2010 was around 4.3 billion. So by that time, we had 19,800 aircraft on wing in the world. So average, we have losses 220,000 per aircraft. 10 years after, if we calculate that the pandemic will bring 63 billion losses to the carriers, to the airline companies, this is the minimum number which is announced by the IATA. So we have around 2.25 million losses per aircraft, grounded aircraft, no revenues, and lease payments, all other payments are in place. So statistics, 10 years, 2.25 million per aircraft losses, it's already regularity. I think that it's a way of the discussion between audit companies, between the regulators, and it's a real big question. Would we need to formate accruals for pandemic as well? Because it cannot be that February airline company announced world record or ever record dividends. They pay to their shareholders dividends, and 1 month after, the company goes to the governments and asks for the state aid, saying that if the government would not financially support the airline company, it would bankrupt. So 2.2 million per aircraft losses, which COVID at least would bring to the airline companies, and the statistic that every 10 years we have a pandemic. So this is a path for the discussions between the regulatory and the auditors. If the companies would start formate accruals, let's say $225,000 per aircraft for the next pandemic, which probably could be even bigger and would bring even bigger losses. And again, the question is, should it be the new IFRS, international accounting standards for the airline companies, which will allow them to survive pandemic and would not bring 90% drop per night in the shares, would allow them to pay conservative dividends to the shareholders and create a budget for the future grounded of the aviation and survive during the pandemic. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Claire Leleu. I'm working for Eurocontrol and running the statistics and forecast department in Brussels. I'm happy to give you some insight about how Aviation Intelligence Unit, the unit I belong to, handle the monitoring of the unprecedented COVID-19 crisis. For those who don't know, Eurocontrol is a pan-European civil military organization dedicated to supporting aviation. And it's an intergovernmental agency with 41 full member states in Europe and 2 collaborative members outside Europe, namely Morocco and Israel. So let's start. This presentation is twofold. First, I will give you a flavor of the analysis we produced. When traffic progressively stopped, we developed a dashboard and broadcasted videos to inform the situation in Europe. As not all the flights were grounded, we had to inspect carefully the flight plans to illustrate unusual phenomena. Secondly, as most of the flights were grounded in April, we had to protect ourselves after the COVID-19, and we had to create scenarios to anticipate the possible futures. These scenarios are helpful for the community, but these scenarios are not forecasts, and I will give you a few words about this. So let's start with the monitoring. In March, Eurocontrol had created a dedicated website to COVID-19, like most of the companies, a specific dashboard which was displaying IFR movement statistics on a daily basis at state, ACC, airport and aircraft operator, as you can see here on this screenshot. We have also started a daily summary called the Airline and State Response to COVID-19. We have accumulated a register of the events. Could it be suspension dates, lockdown dates at state level, but more recently we are also reporting on resumption dates. For example, Air Dolomiti announced on last Friday, that they will start opening again some routes to Frankfurt and Munich, as you can see here on this extract. Moreover, every day our DG was tweeting and Eurocontrol was very active on social media. We have displayed snapshots and movies. I invite you to watch them, especially these before-after movies. You have all the links on this slide. Regular reports and letters were also sent to top management of airports and INSPs and CAAs and other associations to keep them informed. Okay, so now I would like to share with you a few statistics you might not be aware of. Okay, so it all started in China, as you know. Blue line here on this graph is for domestic, Chinese domestic, and green is the international IFR movements. Left axis shows the number of daily movement. While our main database is for Europe, we got this Chinese data from IRON, as notified here at the bottom of this slide. I must say that this ADSB data cover only a fraction of the total Chinese traffic. Anyway, Chinese domestic declined by 75% in January and by up to 85% mid-February, which was their lowest level. Chinese domestic has shown now in the recent days strong growth, and it is now in fact around 65 to 70% of the expected levels at this time of the year. So let's have a look at the situation in Europe. On this graph, Chinese traffic is now shown in gold, and European traffic is in green for year 2020, where as a reference we also plotted the last year traffic in blue, just to have an idea of a normal level expected. So approximately 1 month after the decline in China, the number of flights started to drop in Europe as well, down to minus 80% early April, which was a more severe drop than in China. Overall, in March, the decline was limited because you had a little bit of growth at the beginning of the month, but European traffic posted a 41% decrease in March, 88 in April, and now 86 in May. And in fact, these remaining flights you can see on the green line at the far right were mainly cargo flights, also PSO, public service obligation flights, but repatriation flights. And I will tell you a little bit more about this. So the drop started in Asia, and in fact, all intercontinental flows started to slow down in one go, I would say. So this graph shows all bi-directional flows between Europe and other world regions, excluding the intra-European traffic, which represents the biggest share. So as you can see on the slide, all the flows decreased here from mid-March with various dynamics and amplitude. You can identify the flows with the color on the map. For example, Middle East in green used to be the busiest partner with Europe. It had a share of 5% before the COVID crisis, with around 1,200 daily flights from and to Europe. The flow with Asia Pacific in gray on the chart became the busiest flow with around 9% share after the drop. And they are now recording around 400 flights per day with Europe. just after China, Asia Pacific, we have North Atlantic and Middle East as the next business flows. It must be noted that for the Asia Pacific flow, more than a third of these flights are all cargo flights. Indeed, in our database, we have classified the flights into market segments according to our own rules. This graph shows the growth rate of each market segment per week in 2020. We measure the growth compared to 2019, of course. And as you can see, the all cargo segment in orange is the only one which remained stable, while passenger traffic, mainly traditional and low cost in blue on this graph, respectively decreased by 88% and 96% over the last weeks. So the volumes of all cargo was much more important compared to what it used to be. And as you can see on this new chart, which is the share of each market segment across the full volumes of traffic, we recorded around 23% of flights being all cargo, when this segment before the crisis was only accounting for 3%. Business aviation and charter, as you can see in the graph in red and light blue, have also posted some increase in their shares. As you might have read in the news, most operators parked their fleet, but some managed to continue to operate their passenger fleet carrying cargo. And this is the subject of the next slide. So inspecting carefully the flight plans, we identified the passenger flights which were operated for cargo purposes. This was cross-checked with the news, as you can see on the pictures, and we could identify which airlines were operating such flights. The identification of such flights was made possible through the remark field in the flight plan, where operator can stipulate the purpose of their flights. From our analysis, the total share of cargo, meaning the classical all cargo flights plus the passenger cargo flights, amounted to around 30% on some days, as you can see on the chart. This is a low estimate, as it is not really mandatory for airlines to stipulate the purpose of their flight in the remark field. Using the same principle, we were able to extract from the data warehouse an estimation of the repatriation flights. Again, inspecting this remark field and looking for keywords like repatriation, evacuation, rescue, or humanitarian enable us to measure that the number of repatriation flights surged from mid-March, as you can see on this graph. It reached an average of 40 flights per day in April, and this is apparently not over, even if we expect now a reduction of these flights as the traffic is restarting slowly. So, depending on the week, these flights were mainly operated by network and low-cost carriers, but quite often operated by business aviation or charter operator as well. Again, these statistics are only an estimation of the repatriation flights and represent a minimum, as there is no obligation for operators to explicitly define the purpose of their flights in the flight plan. Now you can also check on the European Commission websites. They have an exhaustive list of the repatriation flights which have taken place so far. Voilà. Some additional stats I would like to share with you are these maps. We have produced a lot of them. You can see them on social media usually. These maps show, for example, this map shows the most frequent routes. I'm talking about only the very short haul routes, less than 500 kilometers. Last year on the left in April, before the COVID crisis, and this year now in April during the COVID crisis. So on this map, you can see that also we see that there are less flights now in 2020. A vast majority of these very short haul routes are domestic. They usually take place within a single country. And you can also interestingly see that the network has slightly changed, and they are here to operate or to serve remote or island communities. So in some states, these are these PSOs, public service obligation, and they are here to ensure connectivity. And COVID-19 outbreak has deeply impacted European transport and mobility. And some states, like for example Norway, were highly dependent on PSOs. As you can see here, there are much more flows which belongs to the top 100 in 2020. Okay, so now let's move to the second part of the presentation. We will discuss about these scenarios which have been created. So where are we now? In terms of daily traffic levels in Europe, you can see on the dark blue line the 2020 daily traffic, and we can record currently in the system around 7,000 flights per day, early June, versus the light blue line, which is the traffic a year ago in 2019, where at this time of the year we were recording around 37,000 flights per day. So this is still an 80% decrease. Based on airline intentions, the network's operation recovery plan from Eurocontrol expects a pickup at around 12,000 flights mid-July. But what about the rest of the year? What are the possible scenarios for the future? So the questions I want to ask here, and the question we had to ask ourselves, are the following: how the traffic could evolve, and everybody is looking for this, for an answer to this question. Do the passengers still want to travel? What about the economic impact? Will the bans between the states be lifted, and when? So having different answers to these questions will shape different futures. And in fact, this is how the creation of a scenario took place at Eurocontrol. Already in March, we had anticipated some pessimistic, middle, and optimistic scenario for the recovery, as you can see on the small picture. And they were mostly inherited from these V-shape or U-shape scenario inspired from other crises you might have heard of. But a month later, we had to review this scenario, especially because there was this IATA summit in April, and we had also collected some different inputs from the industry, including ICAO, IATA, and ACI forecasts. But we had also had a look at the economic forecasts, which is one of the main drivers for traffic growth. And we have also consulted some CEOs of major airlines to be able to understand what were their plans. Speaking about airlines, and to complement these discussions, we have inspected the announcements from the main airlines regarding their capacity reductions, the plans for decommissioning aircraft or retiring or phasing out some of their aircraft, and even delaying some orders. So far, with the news we have collected, we have measured that around 5% of the traffic could disappear, I'm talking in IFR movements, could disappear due to the COVID impact. This list is not exhaustive, so we are still collecting information to be able to refine our estimation. So, accumulating these elements enabled us to create two post-COVID scenarios. As you can see on this new graph. This scenario illustrates the possible impact of the extent to which COVID-compliant operational procedures for airlines and airports are common or not across all European states. As I said, these scenarios are not forecasts. They are very much dependent on variables, as we have just seen, such as the duration and the size of a pandemic across Europe. And these are still not clear. On one hand, a coordinated approach foresees a broad implementation in mid-June and for picking up of the traffic in July. On the other hand, an coordinated approach would significantly impede the rate of a recovery. So we have assumed that the intra-European traffic would return first, based on the experience in China, and the practicality is also involved. So overall, the coordinated measures envisages a loss of 45% of flights in 2020, while the uncoordinated measures scenario would result in a loss of 57% of flights in 2020 versus 2019. Taking all of the above into account, there will be a total industry loss in revenues of approximately 110 billion euros in 2020 for airlines, airports, and ANSPs, as we have estimated. As a final slide, and because I'm a forecaster and our service produces the 7-year and the 20-year forecast, I would like to share with you a few comments on how to move forward now and produce a forecast. If at the beginning of a crisis we tried to follow the pace of events and we were producing forecast after forecast, we recognized that it was useless and we had really to pause and not necessarily envisage a forecast publication ASAP. Here are some thoughts on how to prepare the coming forecast. The first two steps, analyzing and defining the scenario, have been covered in this presentation. Then the next steps consist of adapting the forecasting system to be able to handle the assumptions from the phases. In our case, we realized that the forecasting system had maybe not enough component to really be able to model what really was happening with this crisis. A next approach would be to review the scenario and to review the approach as new information becomes available. And this, in fact, can be an iterative process until we get something robust and we are happy with our scenario. So that's why you have this arrow, and we could come back to the step 2, 3, and 4 for a while. Then, of course, the forecast results will have to present a variety of scenario, and even we think about having some extra what-if analysis, testing over very different scenario. What if a recontamination would happen, things like that. So yes, and of course the last very important step is to communicate about your forecast and your assumptions for the users to be able to use the forecast in a very, I would say, illicit way, and to be able to pick the forecast which corresponds the most to his need. Voilà. So as a conclusion, I would like to, so you have the links in the presentation, and as a conclusion I would like to share with you a short movie which was produced by our communication team, which summarizes the situation. I'm very happy to have presented this presentation, and I'm looking forward to hear my co-presenter colleagues for this afternoon.
It is mid of June, and as we all already seen, airlines start ending their grounding and will start flying soon again. My name is Hannes Müller, and this is my colleague Christine Weidner. We are both from Lufthansa Consulting, and very much delighted to be part of this conference today. This time, unfortunately, on the digital version. The most challenging questions are how long the crisis will last, how the pandemic will progress, and how quickly and to what extent air travel demand will recover. What we already do all know is that this crisis will not be resolved within a matter of months. There are already several scenarios out there trying to forecast the economic impact and the recovery process. Adding to that is not our aim today. Instead, we will rather focus on parameters and indicators that support network planners in focusing on the horizon while flying by sight.
Coming to our key question number one, what makes the current situation so complex and difficult for us right now? The first complexity airlines are dealing with in their forecasts are the prevailing travel restrictions imposed by governments around the world. While we have seen that lockdowns and cross-border restrictions are cautiously being lifted, there are still the key criteria in determining which routes an airline is able to fly. We can see the impact of travel restrictions on capacity reductions across all countries right now. As these restrictions are gradually relaxed, capacity is starting to return, coming back to the skies. Some countries are starting to form COVID-safe bubbles in which travel is possible. For example, Australia and New Zealand, Hong Kong and China, or among the Baltic states. The process for doing so, however, varies across the world. Looking at the European Union, for example, each country has its own approach, which is generally not coordinated. Apart from the lockdowns, COVID-19 has led to even further restrictions for airlines. These include new governmental regulations resulting from state aid grants, which will impact the operational planning and development for airlines. To name only one example, Air France may not conduct any more domestic flights except for the feeder flights via its hub. But even if airlines are allowed to fly, what are customers' expectations that need to be fulfilled for them to decide to fly? It is expected that demand will recover gradually from mid-June, July onwards. Based on findings from several studies and interactions with our clients, we anticipate that, in general, leisure-oriented travel events will recover earlier and grow slightly faster than business travel. As a result, the most attractive destinations for the upcoming month will still be within domestic and then slowly intracontinental markets. Regarding international long-haul tourism, even within the next 2 years, demand is expected to recover only slightly. Business travel, on the other hand side, will suffer even more long-term consequences, as a more digital way of working will be the new normal. This will also be impacted by the difficult financial situation that many businesses will experience over the upcoming decades and quarters. In order to still encourage demand growth for leisure as well as business travel and to ensure positive experience for those who do travel, all players in the travel ecosystem need to redesign the end-to-end passenger journey. This will include more binding, harmonized regulations for air travel to comply with health and cleanliness standards to positively impact customers' willingness to fly. Passengers will need to be thoroughly informed and empowered to take more control on their travel journey, including responsibly assessing their own level of health risk before a journey. In general, buying decisions for traveling will become more complex and extensive as the number of criteria for consideration will increase and travel behavior will change toward more meaningful events. In addition, we still need to take into account reduced long-term predictable demand due to uncertainties in travel planning and changes in the perception of flying. All of these factors lead to a high market volatility and inability to forecast demand based on traditional approaches. Therefore, new indicators as well as new modes of data collection and management are needed. Traditional databases cannot deliver everything one needs in this special context. Real-time data, particularly factors related to disease containment, travel restrictions, booking trends, and customer sentiment, are essential to monitor developments and incorporate them into planning and forecasting.
So what does it mean for the day-to-day business of a network planning department? Traditionally, network planning is an extremely structured process which relies to a large extent on the predictability of travel behavior based on past travel patterns. Today, in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis, the basis which was built up over decades is now not reliable anymore. Airlines will now need to steer through the turbulences of visual flight until they have understood the new demand patterns and the new customer requirements. For the upcoming months, we will see a very dynamic resumption of services and offered volumes. The exact course of the recovery cannot be charted, but must be explored route by route. Therefore, to cope with this new situation, network planning must adopt a new way of working, characterized by flexibility. The foundation is based on all data and facts we know for sure, such as travel bans and bookings, always with the target to detect the earliest sign of demand recovery. For all planning beyond that, airlines must find ways to identify new data. Using and smartly combining these new data has turned out to be one of the core challenges for many airlines we work with. Data or data sources we had experienced to be highly useful are, for example, general economics such as GDP forecasts and income levels, public health indicators related to COVID-19, airline websites information, customer surveys, search trends on online search engines, or unstructured content such as tweets or comments on social media. In line with the need for new data, airlines must focus even harder on collaboration across all related departments. We experience that planning needs to integrate as many data sets as possible into their models, but actually several very interesting data are created, stored and maintained by other departments. One example. Typically it is the marketing department that is in charge of steering performance campaigns and therefore has access to large volume of cookie data. Additionally, functions such as loyalty and customer insights also have very valuable data sets, which are now essential for network planning considerations in the ramp-up phase. So what does it mean? The ability to prioritize routes based on an early demand signals will separate winners from losers in the long run to recover from the COVID-19 crisis.
Knowing the implications of the new normal and also having the insights from how to work and which data are relevant in the future, we are now focusing in our last question on how to proceed in order to chart the path ahead. Having identified the relevant data to consider, the question is, how does one then apply this to predict the future demand structures? At Lufthansa Consulting, we approach the recovery in 4 distinct segments, varying in the level of uncertainty and hence the factors driving traffic and the duration. The first segment is on near-term revival in 2020. This depends on immediate factors such as easing of travel restrictions, travel search or booking behavior, and improving customer sentiment. For airlines, this gives guidance which routes have the most potential for the relaunch. For airports, it allows operational and financial planning for the rest of the year. The second segment describes the traffic growth in 2021 and lays the baselining for long-term demand. The third and fourth segments then consider the long-term perspective by also including the more traditional drivers of air traffic again. We are currently, however, still months, if not years away from entering the phase of mid and long-term growth. Therefore, we would like to talk a little bit more in detail about actions airlines need to take right now. To support our clients' network planning teams and around the world, we are using a tool that tracks the key metrics of markets of countries of interest in real time. This includes, but it's not only limited to, the development of COVID-19 infections, Google Trends for customer searches, travel restrictions, economic indicators, and the capacity being put into the market. Further insights are then gained from benchmarking the data against that of selected other markets or countries. These insights, in combination with route economics and our client's strategy, enables us to develop an airline-specific priority list of potential routes chosen from a broader network portfolio. Using these prioritized routes, we can start to drive schedule planning and optimization. Airlines must put particular focus on achieving reasonable commercial and operational efficiency. This is crucial to overcome new challenges such as longer turnaround times due to hygiene measures and a less dense hub structure due to fewer flights. For ongoing optimization, route performance must be tracked on a regular basis and resulting schedule adjustments be implemented quickly. No one in the industry can guarantee exactly how things will turn out over the upcoming month. But having all the data at hand and making an informed decision is key to success to survive.
So what will the future hold? The travel industry in general, and aviation in particular, will recover. Well, the recovery will take time and may come with some bumps along the way. We will all have to acknowledge, understand and adapt a new way of normal. To successfully manage these future challenges, new and smart data combined with digital concepts are key. We have started the session with social media postings from several airlines. Coming now to an end, we would like to conclude with sharing one last post from Brussels Airlines, which poses the questions whether we shouldn't learn to fly again. Thank you very much for joining today's session. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to contact us. We are happy to hear from you also in the additionally offered online sessions.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. Wherever you are in the world, I hope you're fine, enjoying good health. Thanks, Air Convention, for the opportunity to be here and share with you how Embraer sees the airline industry in Asia emerging in the post-COVID world. Before anything else, I recognize that you are coding. I don't have the illusion of predictability, okay? But the things we know, we don't know. ARED provides some hints on the possible path to recover, and that's exactly what I want to talk about right now. My presentation has two sections, okay? The first one, of course, is the elephant in the room, is airlines. But last but not least, in the second part, I want to also address one structural challenge that this industry needs to address head on. Of course, COVID-19 is the biggest threat the airline industry has ever faced, but this is the opportunity we all have to emerge more efficient and to emerge stronger in the post-COVID-19 world. So, as the pandemic continued to play out, there are basically three groups of countries, let's say, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Unfortunately, the ugly country right now is my home country, Brazil. It's number one in terms of new deaths, daily deaths. India is not in a good position as well. The country is just relaxing the restrictions that kept 1.3 billion people and all aircraft on the ground for about 2 months. Right? The US is also not in a very good position right now. And on the other hand, Asia, because it was the first region exposed to the virus, because it was the first region on the front line, it's reasonable to see that many Asian countries are already in a better position now. So the countries are in different stages of travel resumption, different stages of infections, but overall, the consumers all around the world are holding back their travel plans. It is, however, widely recognized that the domestic operation will lead the recovery. Domestic operation will be the foundation of the recovery. There is in every country a higher propensity to travel domestic in the near future. That will be followed by the so-called travel bubbles, right? Which are those safe corridors connecting low-risk neighboring countries. And the last stage, the last environment to recover is definitely the international operations. So our forecast points to recover the domestic sector by 2022, and 3 years later in 2025, the international sector tend to reach the 2019 levels. Of course, RPK is and will be the primary driver of RPK growth. GDP, the economic output, will be the primary driver of the RPK growth, but confidence will definitely be a major driver from now on. All econometric models need to include the psychological effect of fear in their forecasts. And that by itself brings a lot of uncertainties, right? Which is in line with my opening remarks. The uncertainty is that will lead us to recognize the importance of flexibility to manage the risks, to ride the ups and downs of the business cycle. The dashed lines in the chart shows the bear and bull case scenarios. The gap between them is like 2 to 3 years. So that really highlights how uncertainty the traffic tend to evolve over the course of the next years. And although it's still in early stages, what we can see clearly is that the up to 150 seat segment is definitely leading the recovery, right? In every single region, airlines are bringing the right size jets faster back to the sky. It has been instrumental in restoring the connectivity, in rebuilding airlines network. And still, in terms of flexibility, Asia definitely lags behind the other regions. The proportion of up to 150 seats in the total fleet in service in Asia is just 10%. That compares to 44% in North America, 25% in Europe. And the result of that is Asia has the largest average aircraft size, 185 seats, while Europe has 172 and North America 138. And with this new demand, of course, reduced by 40-50%, airlines will have to adjust their fleet plans to mitigate the impact of this depressed demand. You know, the operating cost of 180-seat aircraft cannot be covered by passenger loads of 150 or fewer. So this is something that needs to be considered over the next years, because the story of Asian airline industry is a combination of high growth but meager profits. Until last year, all airlines here, most of the airlines here rely on single fleet strategy based on 180, 200 seat aircraft for economies of scale and search for the lowest seat cost possible. But the problem with the single fleet strategy is that you have the same aircraft to fly in all market profiles. So basically you have to adjust your network to your aircraft when in fact airlines should be doing different, adapting its aircraft to their network. So because there is this over-reliance in large narrow-body aircraft, the lower yields was always a strategy to stimulate demand and fulfill all the empty seats on a large narrow-body aircraft. The problem now is that what we see is a very limited impact of lower yields to encourage passengers to fly again. As I said, it's about fear. It's not about price elasticity of demand. It's not about elasticity. It's about confidence. It's about fear. So although the low oil price provides some room for airlines to lower their yields, to lower the airfares in order to stimulate demand, that's not as viable as it was before. So something else will have to be considered. And that's exactly what I want to address right now, because irrational capacity, overcapacity, always amplify the negative effects of downturns. So if you see in 2019, so before this current downturn, before the COVID-19 crisis, the EBIT margin posted by Asian carriers was exactly 3.7% according to IATA. That was below the world average of 5.1, and even more shocking, it was about a third of the EBIT margins posted by North American carriers, which, by the way, accounted for more than 50% of industry profitability worldwide. And even historically, the region was already on a downward trend. 3.7% margin in 2019 is exactly half of the margins posted in 2016, the peak of this current cycle. And that, combined with this rupture that we're all living now, will gradually move airlines from a volume-focused cycle to a cycle focused on profitability. You know, a cost per seat only makes sense when you have your airplanes full, right? An empty airplane, cost per seat doesn't really measure airlines' efficiency, doesn't really measure airlines' success. And 180, 200-seat aircraft simply offers no flexibility. And because there's no flexibility, there is a mismatch between aircraft capacity and market demand. And well, as I said, trip cost is going to be increasingly important to measure efficiency. So large aircraft delivers a higher trip cost, and the impact on the bottom line in form of lower profits is obvious. On the other hand, multi-fleet strategy can provide higher flexibility because it allows airlines to change the capacity mix while delivers a very competitive trip cost. And the obvious result is higher profits, higher returns. So that is essentially the most important outcome of this current downturn, that we're going to see airlines gradually migrating from a single fleet strategy to a multi-fleet strategy. And that's exactly what the E2 steps in. The E2 family covers the broadest seat range of capacity from 80 up to 150 seats. The E195 E2, the largest member of the family, can be configured with up to 146 seats in a single class, high density configuration. The maximum range of the family can cover 99.9% of the large narrow bodies, the city pairs covered by large narrow bodies. So it is a compelling case for the region. And again, it's not just about capacity. It's a combination of capacity and cost. So these two charts here, it compares the economics of airlines from different generations. The first, left-hand side, E1 versus CEO, right-hand side, E2 versus NEO. And while the E195 E1 has a disadvantage on a per seat basis of 20%, the E195 E2 simply broken the paradigm of higher seat cost and smaller capacity aircraft. The E195 E2 gives the same advantage on a per trip basis while offers similar comparable cost per seat. So the E195 E2 is as cost effective as the A320neo. So right size and right cost. The E1 with the E1 Embraer has a global footprint. We have around 1,600 aircraft in operation with over 80 airlines all around the world, and the A2 will continue its tradition. We also have a growing customer base with the A2. The airlines relatively new to the market, the E195 E2, for example, entered and serves in the second semester of last year with Azul, who was the launch operator. And although it's relatively new, the customer feedback, the customer testimonials have been very positive. They are all highlighting the better than expected performance, how this aircraft is able to provide flexibility and provide a low cost structure. So this is the kind of comments that we expect airlines all around the world echoing as they recognize the importance of flexibility in order to ride the ups and downs of the business cycle. From now on, it's clear to me that the one-size-fits-all approach has never sounded as obsolete as it sounds today. And on the other hand, the flexibility and the right sizing concept has never sounded as important as it sounds today. And this is fundamentally the most important outcome of this current downturn. This is fundamentally the most important change in mindset that will eventually lead airlines to emerge from this crisis stronger and even more efficient. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. If you have any comments, questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Rytis Beresnevičius from Airtime News, speaking during Air Convention Digital Week. Today I'm with Chief Executive Officer of Air Dolomiti, Jörg Eberhard, discussing possibly one of the most important factors of an airline's financial health, its revenue. So, first of all, hello Jörg, how are you? How are things
going? I'm fine. Hello Jonas.
Hi. So, in general, what was the mood among the top-level executives before the crisis about the revenues, the revenue streams, and in general, what was the mood in Europe?
I think we came out of a very positive period before the crisis. We had a successful year 2019, and 18 was even better. So it hit us really in a period where we had a lot of plans to increase capacity, where there has been a lot of ideas also to invest into innovations. All plans that we then, with the beginning of the crisis, we had to suspend.
Yeah, so you briefly mentioned capacity there. In the Italian market, for example, 2 airlines went bankrupt even before the pandemic, namely Air Italy and Ernest Airlines. Did you have any plans to bounce on the opportunity before the pandemic and maybe during the summer 2020 season?
For the Italian market, it has to be said that before the pandemic, there was a lot of overcapacity from our point of view.
Yeah.
And the business model of Air Dolomiti is basically feeding the hubs of Lufthansa Group. It's Frankfurt and Munich. So there's not much overlap with the business models of the other carriers you mentioned. And now we see as this capacity is moved out of the market, we might see some opportunities also as Air Dolomiti to do some point-to-point flying. As we already started in Italy, we took up routes from Florence to Sicily, for example. There might be in the future, we hope there could be some more opportunities in the future as before the pandemic.
Sure, okay. So are you surprised about the fact that there were no high-profile airline liquidations so far during the crisis?
No, I think even though in this business we have not too much working capital, but at least everybody had some cash for several weeks or months. And most airlines then used also this short-term work schemes depending on the country they are based in. And then lately, all the big airlines received state aid, so that gave us the time to breathe, the time to settle and to restart. Yeah. So this is more or less the situation. Of course, if it takes another 6 months, the situation as it is, we as Air Dolomiti would have severe problems.
Okay. Are you planning to apply for state aid, or are you relying on Lufthansa for increased liquidity?
We are already receiving money from the state in the so-called Cassa Integrazione, as most of our employees are still at home. So the state in Italy is compensating partly the personal cost. Yeah. As other states are doing as well. And then there's another initiative with a new law in Italy to grant also state aid to Italian airlines, but we don't know yet how this will be executed, as the law or this decree is being publicated only 2 weeks ago.
Okay, fair enough. So I think it's a good time to switch to the topic of revenue right now. So one interesting fact I found that in July 2019, Air Dolomiti introduced new pricing systems to meet their passenger needs and seemingly increasing the range of potential customers on board the airline's aircraft. Could you expand on your thought process behind the price systems?
We have been started more than a year ago. We started a commercial integration projects together with our mother company Lufthansa. So the idea was to integrate Air Dolomiti much closer into the Lufthansa commercial systems. And among these systems, it's not only revenue management but also pricing.
Yeah.
And hopefully we can continue this project, because the projects with the beginning of the crisis have been suspended as well, of course, because it generates cash out.
Yeah.
And we reduced all activities that generate cash out in this situation. But hopefully we might take this project up again, so that Air Dolomiti in the future would be integrated much closer into the Lufthansa IT commercial world, meaning that we will have much more possibilities in pricing, also in real-time pricing, the system where Lufthansa Group invested a lot in. So from our perspective, within the last 3 months of this year, we could take this project up again.
Okay. So how do you think a diverse product on board could help an airline navigate the crisis?
Firstly, it has been said that we depend a lot on the regulations that we face. Currently, there's not so clear yet what will be the regulations in a new normal, how we call it, after the crisis. We are still, don't forget, we're still in the crisis. It's not yet say separated. So the question is what this regulation will allow us to do as an onboard product, or also even the product on ground. We also consider the product not only the onboard but also the part on ground. And within these regulations, we try to move. Of course, we want to come back to this passenger-oriented, this client-oriented approach we had before. As you might know, we offered much more than usual point-to-point airline offers. This feeding part is you can have a glass of good wine on board of the Air Dolomiti flights and so on, but we try and we want to come back to this qualitative approach as soon as possible, but we depend very much on the regulations.
Yeah. So I think you went down the road of appealing to a bit more price-conscious passengers. Yet, as you mentioned, the product on board even includes a glass of wine on Air Dolomiti flights. So how difficult is it to balance these two things in general, like the price-conscious passengers and the great passenger experience on board as well in general and during a moment of crisis?
Yes, it's even more difficult in the crisis, as we need urgently. We have to plan our liquidity in a much different way than before. So the challenge is really how much product can we offer and how much our passengers and clients are willing to pay for that.
Yeah.
As nobody knows, there are some projections, some ideas, some scenarios, but nobody knows exactly what happens, and also about the behavior of our customers will change after the crisis. We don't know. So the only thing is that we can try, that we can experiment some element and see how the response of the market are. And if the response is possible, then we continue that way. We are more in a try and error phase than ever. Also because of the planning of our capacity that we do on a monthly base. So we don't know yet what we will fly in the second half of July, for example. And this is much different than before, but gives us, on the other hand, gives us the opportunity to rethink, to maybe restructure some elements we had before, and put on test some ideas, some projects, and this is I would say it's unique, and in this industry since more than 25 years. So it's really a big challenge on this.
So I think the general consensus among the industry was that as time went on, airlines unbundled things out of the ticket. So, for example, seat reservations, carry-on baggage as well. Do you think airlines, once the crisis passes, or is it during currently, do you think they will once again bundle those items, or it will again maybe unbundle even more stuff from the ticket?
From my point of view, the unbundling is going on, so maybe accelerating even. Yeah. But also a technical question: how you're able in the reservation systems to really separate also the single elements of the product and to price them. But I think it's a trend that will go on and maybe even accelerate it.
Okay, so one thing I think a lot of people notice is that, for example, airlines in the United States put a lot of emphasis on their loyalty programs, but in Europe, since there are a lot of price pressure from low-cost carriers, do you think the COVID-19 will force airlines, especially in Europe, to take a deeper look into their loyalty programs and perhaps lure passengers that way instead of appealing to the more price-conscious passengers, maybe?
Well, I think we have to take this opportunity to take a look into all part of the supply chain, also from the passenger perspective, as we did before. But right now we have the opportunity to change it in a much more revolutionary way than before, as we were more in an evolution. About frequent flyer programs, we have been successful in the past. Now we have to see in the future how the behavior, especially of our business passengers, will change. There are these hypotheses that people will do more via video conferencing and less, and will fly less. But our experience is also from more than 20 years ago, where the argument was the same. That the communication, that the communication itself intensified. Yeah. Meaning people communicate more, so they're using whatever channel there is. But if you have to negotiate, if you have to create trust between persons, from our point of view, it's still necessary that persons meet, and this is also my personal experience. And if there will be still a business or remarkable business travel, what we think there will be, then a frequent flyer program is of great importance. We can anyhow optimize this according to the new normal that we then find in the future.
Yeah. Do you think business travel will return like leisure travel will do, or it will dip down a bit because of the crisis and because of the emergence of Zoom and other programs?
I think our personal view is that at the beginning we will see a peak in business travel, because everybody wants to. The restart has to meet the business partners. Of course, depending on the restrictions we are still facing between the single states. But if it's all open again, we expect a peak at the beginning, but it will then be a drop because everybody then has to do more or less, again, homework, restructuring the companies, doing projects of cost efficiency and so on. There's a typical work that is done in a crisis, in a downturn, in an economic downturn. And from this base, then I would suppose there will be, again, increasing business travel. But it's more or less a qualitative view. I cannot give you any numbers because it would be all guessed.
Yeah, it's a guessing point in this game, I think. So seemingly there are two camps in the industry currently. One that thinks that lower prices will drive up the demand for air travel, and the other one that believes that passenger confidence in the fact that they are going to be safe on board in regards to their health will only stimulate the demand. What do you think? Which camp are you more tentative to choose?
I don't believe that lower prices will stimulate or will help our passengers to overcome their feelings about risk of traveling. I think lower prices could anyhow stimulate. We have to lower the risk as far as possible.
Yeah.
And we already see some passengers coming back, some more confidence on the passenger side. It's always a different question. It depends on the segment of travelers you have. Depends on if it's leisure or more business. We see on the leisure side, we see much more stimulating with lower prices. It was before the crisis, as it will be after the crisis, from my point of view, the same. And in the business part, less. But it also depends on the capacity that we see in the market in the new normal phase. If there will be definitely less capacity, then we would have an opportunity to see quite stable yields in the business. If we face again overcapacity, then it's again a very price sensitive market. But it's difficult to tell. We have to experiment, depending also on the routes. Point to point is much different than hub traffic. Business much different as leisure. No clear. I cannot give you a clear answer on this.
Okay. So I think Air Dolomiti is one of the airlines that prides itself on the passenger experience on board and both off board. Do you think that passenger experience sensitive travelers will dictate the new terms and the type of service that they get on board during the crisis and after the new normal comes into play?
I think we will have this effect that people remember the crisis. That people remember also the lockdowns in the various countries. They will not forget this phase. Will remain in their heads somehow. So if we at the beginning we will try to do what we can as on-board service, this will be. I'm sure this will be appreciated by our customers. Maybe some elements we think about this kind of lunch bags or that we give upfront, or not even that we prepare on the seats, for example. This could be an idea for us to restart and also lowering the risk on board, as our crews don't have direct contact, are not in direct contact with the passengers, or we can reduce this as far as possible. And then I think it's a common objective, a common target to reduce this risk, and we will be all in the same boat. It's not to, let's say, save money doing less service on board.
Yeah.
And I think this positive atmosphere could be somehow also kept in the future, to maybe being even more sensitive to passenger needs, being even more closer to the passengers to our clients in a certain way.
Okay, so to sum up, will COVID-19 force airlines to look for new revenue streams or upgrade the old ones?
I think we already had a very close, very intense discussions about say new revenue streams, meaning auxiliary revenues. It's still an issue. It was before the crisis and also after the crisis. So everybody tries to also, we mentioned the unbundling, everybody tries to unbundle the products to give different price tags to certain elements of the product. This will go on, but we are somehow also limited as in where we are in the value chain as airlines.
Yeah.
We have the advantage that we have our passengers on board, so we have them physically, meaning much more touch points and also qualitatively speaking touch points of a very high value. If you compare that to online touch points, we have it really offline. This will give us in the future the possibilities to address much more in a much more direct way the needs and at the end the willingness to pay for additional services.
Yeah.
But it has to be said that after the crisis, we expect there will be less money for investments, and if you have less money to invest, also these kind of innovations we need on a technical side. Let's say address the needs of the passenger, address the willingness to pay for additional services could be less, meaning what we had before as projects, innovative projects, could be slowed down. So at least from my point of view. Anyhow, we try then to give the right priorities to the right initiatives. But at the beginning, within the next 1 or 2 years, it might be difficult to invest into very innovative projects.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you, Jörg, for speaking to us during Air Convention Digital Week. I hope we'll tune into the rest of the streams, and goodbye. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Goodbye. And until next time.
Hello, I'm David Goodyear from Oxford Economics Tourism Economics Division. For those of you who don't know us, Oxford Economics was founded in 1981 as a commercial venture with Oxford University. We're now one of the world's leading independent global forecasting and advisory firms. Tourism Economics is a wholly owned subsidiary of Oxford Economics, and we focus on the outlook and economic impact of tourism. So I'd like to thank you for joining this session on the outlook and uncertainty in travel demand, and in particularly for air demand, based on what we're seeing in terms of the economic outlook and the current situation. So starting off with the big picture, what we're looking at as a result of the current pandemic that we are in the midst of, and the very large associated recession, is that we do expect to see global international travel more than halve in 2020. This is a very large fall and completely unprecedented, and represents something of a downgrade from our prior forecast that we carried out a couple of months earlier, and is certainly lower than our forecasts that we were expecting at the start of the year. And it has been something of a challenge to produce these forecasts, as we have been doing more regular updates as the year has gone on. But we do seem to have stabilized somewhat in terms of the outlook, and to some extent, the forecasting from here on in is somewhat easier, in that we do appear to have hit bottom, and direction-wise, the only way is up. We can see the direction of travel, but there is uncertainty in terms of how rapidly that's gained, and how this varies by different destinations. So sticking with a view of what we see for 2020 first, this is a universal impact. We are expecting to see very large drops across all destinations worldwide. All markets are being affected. Looking here at international arrivals to the largest destinations worldwide, this is ranking it in terms of the size of the fall that we expect in terms of arrivals for different markets worldwide, which is a function partly of the size of the market. And it might be more instructive to focus on the percentage numbers towards the left of this chart here, which shows the expected falls in arrivals for the current year. There is some variation that we do expect across countries based upon certain country and destination within country specific factors, things such as seasonality, different country policies, but we do clearly expect some very large falls across all different destinations. Then the challenge, as we are looking ahead, is in producing forecasts for the following years. There's three broad areas that we look at as we're producing these forecasts, and that also gives us three different areas for uncertainty in general terms. So firstly, we have to look at the travel restrictions that are in place, that different governments put in force, that may stop people traveling from one country to another. There have been some very strict policies in place to date that are now starting to ease, and we have to make assumptions about how these are going to be eased in future. Second area of uncertainty and key areas for drivers that we look at is the economic uncertainty. This is related to what loss in GDP we're looking at in this recession, what that impact that has on incomes, employment, wealth, and crucially on spending. And then related to this, related to both of these areas, we see the third area, which is consumer confidence, which is acting as something of a magnifying effect. As the longer restrictions are in place, the greater the economic loss, the weaker consumer and traveller sentiment will be. So going through these in turn, starting off as we look at the travel restrictions, we have constructed what we call the Travel Restriction Stringency Index. And this is an index that we've constructed for all different markets worldwide. And we look with the construction of this index, we look at the travel to that market by all of the different source markets, providing different weights for all of those different source markets, and then look at how available travel is for all of those different bilateral flows based on the different policy announcements that are in place, and then a series of assumptions thereafter. So we can see, looking at this, I've got 3 examples of some different markets here. So we can see that China hit the maximum value of 100 earlier in March, as they were quicker than every other country to enter lockdown because of the earlier outbreak there. But then they have also been quicker to exit the heavy lockdown, and we've seen some of the restrictions starting to ease, and our score on this index starting to come down. Then we've got France, which is something of a similar picture to most European countries, and the US providing something of a contrast. Both entered lockdown at roughly the same time. Strict travel restrictions lasting until this month, but thereafter we do expect something of a divergence. US is likely to be very slow, more gradual in terms of easing its travel restrictions, whereas we see more rapid easing for France. Now, this is a function of a number of things. Partly it's the specific country policies, but a real important part of that does relate to the source market mix. If we look at this in the left-hand chart, we can see a global view looking at this stringency index and how this varies for different types of travel. So we've got the dotted line here is showing the stringency index for total international travel. But sitting below that, we can see the grey line, and this is referring to short-haul travel, that is travel from immediate neighbours. And we expect to see this restrictions being lifted more rapidly for neighbouring countries, and indeed we are already seeing that. We're seeing the emergence of certain travel bubbles, notably in the Baltics. We're seeing the travel bubble there. We're seeing Australia and New Zealand have announced their bubble, allowing free travel between those countries. Other bilateral agreements are starting to spring up now. And then by contrast, we see travel from long-haul markets. Restrictions are likely to be in place for much longer there, only coming down later. Now, if we look at the right-hand chart here, we can see the contrast in source market mix for US, China, and France that we had before. And it's this really high share of the short-haul demand for France. That reliance on travel from close neighbours is what means that there will be this more general easing for France coming a lot earlier. US have a much higher reliance on long-haul markets, which means that we do expect to see that easing coming back a lot later, and this will translate into some differences in the monthly pattern for arrivals growth. But when we're looking at the forecast for 2020 and even beyond, we do need to look into the usual seasonal pattern. And we can see on this that Europe is much more seasonal than other regions. European destinations really heavily reliant on that summer season, the summer travel. So any restrictions in place during these months will have a really large effect. So this is providing some incentive for that more rapid easing as well within Europe, even though it does mean that any impacts, any restrictions in those months will have a large impact. And therefore, if you cast your mind back to the chart showing the different impacts expected for 2020 by market, that's why we don't expect to see Europe experiencing significantly lower falls than a lot of other markets. Some destinations we do expect to see some lower falls than, say, the US, but there are still some significant drops expected because of this seasonality and the impact that any restrictions will have. And as mentioned, there is a lot of uncertainty out there and a lot of uncertainty in this view as we're putting this together. And this is one reason why we have been exploring alternative forecasts. And so we've got alternative sets of assumptions for this index. Upside assumptions where there's more rapid easing is enabled by the outbreak being kept fully under control, and then more pessimistic downside assumptions where the restrictions are in place for a lot longer throughout 2020 and into subsequent years. Now, as we're putting this together to look at a forecast, obviously we do also then need to take into account the second area of uncertainty. So that is the economic impacts. So we've got GDP here, and we're looking at some Oxford Economics forecasts and the forecast range for GDP. We've got a distribution of plausible scenarios that we've defined. You can see our current baseline is for GDP to begin recovery in the second half of this year. There's a lot of indicators to suggest this will take place. Experience in China coming out of lockdown gives a great benchmark for what we can expect in terms of the shape of the recovery, if not exactly the growth rates. So we do expect that growth second half of this year coming back to, although not fully back to where we would have otherwise expected to be at the start of the year. There is some uncertainty on the upside. Things could go better, but we do also have to acknowledge there is a large downside risk to this, very heavily weighted to the downside, different scenarios that could come through with the lack of fiscal support. If some of the support packages are in place that give us room for optimism, some of those are pulled away, ended too soon, we could see growth being undermined and a fallback. Second wave of outbreaks, renewed lockdown measures could see us down in a worse situation. And we see a 9% range of GDP distribution, which is a very wide range, more than we would normally expect. And we do expect that then to translate into our forecasts for tourism activity. We see by the time we get to 2025, still a 9% range in outcomes in different forecasts that we see around our baseline. But in the nearer term, 2020, 2021, again, much wider range of impacts there. Risks really skewed to the downside because of this possibility of restrictions lingering, as well as the worse economic outcomes, and also this will be magnified by some of the sentiment effects that mentioned. If people's propensity to travel, propensity to spend on discretionary items is reduced, then this will be lower still. And there will be some lingering fears about safety on travel, people wanting to avoid crowds, avoid crowded places, avoid traveling to crowded places. The longer this restrictions are in place, the longer some of those sentiment effects will linger, which provides further downside risk. So far been focusing on the international travel, but of course the other element to this is the domestic market, which is sometimes overlooked part of the travel market, but it is a very important part here. Looking here at some hotel numbers, domestic is a very important part of overall demand, and it's going to become more important. We expect to see a softer fall in domestic travel than in international, 33% relative rather than the over 50% fall. And we do expect to see a more rapid recovery as well in the domestic, regaining 2019 levels by 2022 rather than 2023. For international, that's going to be driven by, again, many of the same factors that have already been mentioned. You've got the income and wealth effects once we get beyond the immediate restrictions. We also get the sentiment effects in play here, people staying closer to home because where they feel that bit more safe. And there is also an upside opportunity to the domestic view. There is very large opportunity for people to substitute what some ordinarily outbound trips, trips internationally that they would ordinarily take, they could be substituted for domestic travel. And we've created some indices to look at that. So we've got what we call our Domestic Opportunity Index, and this is looking at domestic travel relative to all travel undertaken by source market, that's domestic and outbound. And we can see those markets which normally have a very large proportion of travel that goes international towards the left-hand side of this chart, so UK, Canada, South Korea, Germany, even Italy. There is a large opportunity for those destinations to harness some of that normal travel that would normally be lost going overseas, that could remain at home. So there's large opportunities to mitigate some of the losses in some of these countries. And this provides some potential growth opportunities in recovery. And we have combined a lot of these factors to look at what we've called our travel potential index, which indicates some of the markets which we may expect to have the strongest opportunity for growth in recovery. Again, similar group of markets we can see towards the left of this chart as having that domestic growth potential, but also having a reliance on short-haul markets as well as domestic markets, which already seen are the more stable parts of the market. Whereas further out to the right-hand side, we see those markets that are more reliant on the international travel, don't necessarily have the large domestic or outbound market that they can rely on, that we expect to see having a bit more of a hard time, some more struggles in that recovery period. And to finish off, just want to share some of the the views for specifically for air passengers. So sharing some numbers from the air passenger forecasts that we produce with IATA. So this is looking at some forecasts that we produced in collaboration in April, and we're just starting work on some revised numbers, so these numbers may change in the near future, but the growth profile is very similar in these to what we've seen before, likely to remain similar in our revised forecasts. The very large fall in 2020, followed by seemingly rapid growth in subsequent years, but still not expecting to see that recovery to 2019 levels until 2022 or 2023. And domestic, we do again expect to lead the way here. But as mentioned, there are some clear downside risks to this, and risks that we might downgrade our forecast further in this upcoming round. And we did quantify some short-term downside scenario, which looked at a worse outcome, and that's something we will be reviewing, and we may be moving towards this kind of view in the new update. And we can see here, that even under the downside case, there's some similar view for across all different regions, different markets. That large fall, subdued recovery, and possibly a later recovery under this short-term downside scenario, which may become our baseline, and some worries there for Europe because of some of the sluggish underlying growth that we have seen means that it could be later to recover. Asia Pacific, if some of the other trends that we have been seeing reassert themselves, such as the continued rise in middle class households' ability to afford travel, see those reasserting themselves, more rapid growth, potentially a faster recovery to 2019 levels, even if we're not expecting to see fully regaining some of the growth and the growth trends that we were seeing prior to the coronavirus outbreak. So I'd like to finish now and thank everyone for their time. Thank you for joining us. If you have any queries or would like any further details on what has been shared, please get in touch with me. My contact details are at the start, or my colleague whose details are shown here now. So thank you again for your time, and have a great rest of your day.